Empty the chamber on them. And how do you do that? We're 6 seconds, put 8-point beat, everything you got. Everything you got. Turn that shit up. Let's go.
Welcome to the Scoop Order Live. It is Monday night. The offseason is raging on. The coaches are all over the country, visiting high schools, kind of crisscrossing the map right now, trying to see some kids for the last time, some kids for the first time, some young kids, some 25s, some 24s. Big time right now. And the players are getting the screws put to them by Mickey Marotti, which is great. They need that as they go into the 6 a.m. workout phase of the offseason program. A lot of news. Bill the Bank Greene was down in Miami for a huge 7-on-7 tournament. He did a big report on that. We'll touch on that momentarily, talking about some of that at BuckeyeScoop.com, some of the big names that were down there. That was kind of the who's who of the 7-on-7 scene in South Florida. And just general musings, and we will take your questions as always. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Hoo day to all you Bengals fans as the Bengals are marching towards yet another Super Bowl appearance. That being said, as always, we are thankful for you guys. We are growing all because of you guys. So thank you so much. If you enjoy this content, please give us a like. We appreciate the likes. Subscribe. One thing I forgot to say last week that I need to start saying again is shout out where you're from. We had a Kyoto, Japan. So we are truly international here on the Scoop. Appreciate that. So you guys keep shouting out where you're from, what part of Ohio, what part of the country, what part of the world. We love hearing that. And who do you want to see in some of these position battles in the spring? There's some really deep rooms. A lot of guys came back. It's going to be ferocious to get any of the scrap reps that are left behind some of these high-end starters. So who do you want to see step up? Is it C.J. Hicks? Is it Jaden Ballard? Is it one of the young defensive linemen, Kenyatta Jackson? Excuse me. Some really big names. We need some corners to step up. We're going to get into all of that. As always, we appreciate you guys. That being said, I'm going to bring in the internationally known Nevadabuck. Nevada, straight from Cleveland, back to Los Angeles. How are you tonight?
Did you almost say Kenyatta Goodwin when you were talking about the player? Did you almost say tell the truth?
No, because one's skinny and one's fat. One's really fat. So no, I did not. So I get my Kenyatas mixed up. But one's like Kenyatta and Kiata, and I don't know. But Kenyatta Goodwin is like, again, people, they're ready to jump off the bridge last year, and we didn't get that kid, and he's literally persona non grata. Kenyatta Jackson, however, I have from a very good source, is looking very impressive, and he's a guy that's got some pass rush shoots, which is something that, again, we need. Kenyatta is a kid from South Florida, Chaminade Madonna, which is, that's the home of Jeremiah J.J. Smith and JoJo Trader. So I try not to say too many JJs and JoJos to Nevada because he gets the wires crossed sometimes, but that is also where Kenyatta Jackson hails from. Kenyatta Goodwin is probably somewhere eating and not playing college football, so don't care about him anymore. So how was the trip? Because you had a nice trip. Thank you, Adam Silver, for allowing these guys. Nevada came across the country to see Steph Curry and Giannis, and he left seeing I don't even know who the Bucks or who the Warriors have. Did they have like Mitch Richmond or Chris Mullin, or who they dress for you?
Let me tell you who was not dressed. Okay, when not dressed was Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond, and I guess is Iguodala still on that team? I don't know. They were not dressed. Jordan Poole was dressed, and he lit us up pretty good. And then on Saturday night, I got to see the Bucks without Giannis and Chris Middleton, and so the Cavs were able to eke out a victory. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, always great to be back in the land. Always great to be downtown Cleveland. For people cannot really appreciate how much of a renaissance has gone on downtown Cleveland compared to how it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's great. I mean, the bars and the restaurants were popping, and it was a lot of fun being there at the arena with all the people, and then going out afterwards and having a few pops and get some food. So it was a great time was had by all, and it was good to be back in the land.
Well, now like the current 2023 Bucks, you are back on the grind, back to work. Nevada, the offseason program is taking off. There's a lot of guys working to make their moves. Any particular guys in positions? It was interesting. You kind of started a little bit of a stir on the board. Something I really liked about a guy that you potentially could move to the Mitch Rossi role. Young kid out of Arlington, Ohio. Talk a little bit about that, because I believe that was brought up last year. He kind of shot it down. But again, like I think the kid needs to get on the field in some way, shape, or form as a backup linebacker. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mentioned this in the last podcast, talked about it a little bit on our message board, but Reed Carrico. Reed Carrico is a kid that if you talk to the other players on the team and you ask them who is, pound for pound, the most athletic or one of the most athletic kids, strength, speed. His name just always comes up, and it was shocking to me that he was so highly regarded, considering the fact that he hasn't been able to find the field. Now we all know that pure athleticism doesn't necessarily mean great football player, but Reed is a guy that's just blessed with just some amazing athletic talent. And if you look at his high school career, obviously now like most players that are going to Ohio State, he was a standout on both sides of the ball. But any kid from Ireland is going to have that type of toughness and just is going to really get after it. And when we were talking about the Mitch Rossi role, they'd offered him kind of a hybrid H-back fullback spot last year. Kind of a la like we thought about what happened with Stan White, another former linebacker that came into Ohio State, switched over to the side of the ball and made a little bit of a mark in that position. And didn't Reed wasn't interested in pursuing it. And I've always kept that in the back of my mind that that's something that Ohio State is probably going to want to approach him about again this year. And it's really interesting because there's probably only 8 or 10 teams in the NFL that really utilize the fullback, but that's up from where it was 2 or 3 years ago, and it's probably not as many as it's going to be in the future. So if I'm Reed Carrico and I'm presented with the opportunity to move to that spot, we'll call it the Mitch Rossi, I'm really thinking about it because it's a path to the field, and in my opinion, it's a path to the NFL. I think a guy that can play special teams, could play defense on a pitch, and also can play that fullback hybrid position for you. I think those are becoming more increasingly valuable pieces for NFL squads that are looking for versatility on these limited rosters. And if it was me, and it was my kid, I'd be like, hey, let's jump at that chance and let's do it. But I'm interested to hear what other people think about it. But I think it's a great idea. I know it's something that was on OSU's mind last year, and I know that they're going to approach him about it again this year, and we'll see if he bites.
To me, if I'm Reed, who's a kid that was, he played small school ball at Ironton. Now, Ironton is an absolute powerhouse in these smaller levels. Really, really a tough out. And when you play at a school like that and you're a kid like Reed, you play every down. You're carrying, he'd carry the ball 30 times and he'd also play every snap of defense. And he was a monster. He's an absolute werewolf. And he's a kid that, he's a linebacker. And in our new system, which is a nickel defense, a 4-2-5, and we don't play a third linebacker basically ever. If you're a kid like that, all of a sudden Tommy comes back. Mild surprise. Steele coming back wasn't much of a surprise because he's only his second year in the transition to linebacker. I would look to get on the field however I could. I think this is a really important spring for Reed. I don't think that I'm not saying that to be negative, but it's like, when you're going on year 3, not a lot of PT so far. You do whatever you can to get onto the field. And again, the Mitch Rossi thing, people might turn their nose up at being a fullback and whatever. And again, we don't know if Brian Hartline's going to use him the same way Kevin Wilson did. Obviously, Kevin Wilson was the coordinator last year. He was also the tight ends coach. So we had a very tight end flavored offense, which again, I didn't think was a bad thing because I thought Mitch Rossi was consistently one of our best 11 players on offense. And against Georgia, he played one of the greatest games I've ever seen a player play. In terms of from pass protection, it was just, a yeoman performance versus Georgia's fantastic defense. And I think that, a guy that can, fill that role is insanely valuable because I don't think that body type exists in the tight end room right now. It really does. Joe, I'd love for Joe Royer to be able to do that, but he's not the shorter, squattier, body type that would occupy, kind of a tight end type role. I would imagine he's going to be the number 2 tight end going into spring. When he was playing against Georgia after having a tragic year in which his mom passed away, it really spoke volumes as to how tough that kid is, because he was going through a really rough time last year. His mom died during the season, missed a lot of time, which obviously very understandable. But I love that kid. I think he's a really tough kid. I remember at camp vividly when it was him versus Luke Lachey for that one offer. They did every rep against each other. The whole world was watching, because that literally was like it was something that should have been like a reality show or something, because it was like literally whoever has the best day gets to go to Ohio State. So, they had to, Kevin Wilson had to be blown away by that kid to not take Jim Lachey's son, Luke, who's a legacy. And, he's got to see Jim every single game, and every single, on the away games, the color commentator and the play-by-play guy, Paul Keels and Jim Lachey, they actually fly on the flight with the team. So, Kevin Wilson's got to sit on that plane and look at Jim Lachey, who again is one of the nicest human beings on earth, every day, and say, "Hey, I didn't take your son. I took this other kid." Because if it's close, you're gonna take Luke Lachey, obviously. But Joe was that good that day, and I think he's got a bright future. Super excited about him. Yeah, it's just interesting, because now's the time of the year where the team, they get together and they start to really work as a 2023 team, which it sounds kind of funny, but there is that kind of stark reality of who is moving on and they're not coming back. CJ Stroud gone, Jackson Smith and Jigba gone, Zach Harrison gone. Some of the guys that were leaders on the team gone, and now you kind of see the metamorphosis of what the new team becomes, and it's all forged in the offseason. Nevada, me and you are probably as high on the 2023 Buckeyes as anybody on earth. Talk a little bit about your excitement and why you think 2023's Ohio State football team could actually exceed what 2022 was able to do.
Well, I don't think there's any question they're going to. I think it's just top to bottom, a better team, a more complete team. Offensively, we've talked about that. We've gone on and on about the embarrassment of riches. Returning 99% of your receptions and 98% of your rushing yards, and I mean, it's just you've got some skill up and down the line. You've got returning starters on the offensive line. You've got a quarterback position that is going to be kind of plug and play. And then you go to the defense. The defense with the returnees has now gone from, I thought the defense would be really good. And I think next year the defense is I'll change my thing from really good to borderline dominant. I think it's going to be a borderline dominant defense that, will definitely scratch, top 15, could beat top 10, could be top 5. I think it's going to be that good of a defense. And I think when you have those, that type of a combination of the dynamic offense with a dominant defense, it's going to be a big year for Ohio State. And, I wouldn't have felt this way if we didn't, turn guys like Tommy Eichenberg and Lathan Ransom and, Josh Proctor coming back is a kind of an underrated surprise. And, getting Matt Jones back as a 6-year anchor on your offensive line. And I would be, a high level of excitement, but not this level of excitement. I think this is going to be a special team, a really special group. And, look, CJ's gone, but I remember when Tennessee lost Peyton Manning and had to replace him with T. Martin, and then finally went on and won the national championship with T. Martin. So I think these guys are going to step right in and play. I think it's going to be a spirited competition, but I'm excited about this team, and I cannot wait for spring football. I think we're one cornerback away, and I think the cornerback for our team is probably on the roster. If I was Ohio State right now, I'd be going to that wide receiver room and I'd be looking at some of those young wide receivers who may or may not find a path to the field off on the offense. Given the fact that we're returning Marvin and Emeka and Julian, and you got Brandon Innes, and you got Carnell Tate, and you got the Roger. I'd go to one of those wide receivers and go, something? Chris Gamble moved over from a wide receiver over to the cornerback room and made $100 million in the NFL. Which one of you guys wants to be our next lockdown corner? And I would do that. And people may laugh at that idea or say, oh, it's ridiculous, could never happen. But it has happened, and people have done it before. It doesn't happen often. But, rather than have a guy buried deep in the wide receiver room, why not bring him over to defense, line him up, see how he can cover these guys, and see if there's not a hidden gem already existing on the roster, because I think we're one cornerback away from being a national champion next year, and that's how close I think we are.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's an outstanding thought, just because some of the greatest legends in Ohio State history have been guys that have switched positions kind of due to a declining role or a new change in philosophy, or basically they had no chance of producing at a position. So just from my experience, my limited experience at Ohio State when I was a coach, Darryl Baldwin, a guy that was a defensive tackle, had no future there. Urban Meyer said, we got to move to offensive tackle. It was a very tough transition for Darryl. Not that he had any, because he's one of the nicest kids, one of the greatest kids, almost too nice. Extremely stiff, a kid that had to, maybe the stiffest player to ever play at Ohio State. We had to stretch him out and have him do yoga, but whatever. He turned himself into a starting right tackle that won a national championship, and again, if Darryl doesn't agree to switch positions, then he probably just goes off into the ether, never plays at Ohio State any sort of substantial role, and he just, graduates and moves on with his life. But instead, he turned into a starting right tackle. Reed Fraggle did the same thing. He was a tight end. Urban Meyer comes in, looks at Reed. He's not a tight end for the Urban Meyer type offense, which is built more for a Jeff Hireman or a Nick Vanette body type. Reed, supersized guy, not going to have a role. Zach Bourne, obviously, the uber famous photo of him flexing over the quarterback at Michigan over Devin Gardner. He's the guy that literally in the middle of the season, we were phasing him out of the offense because, again, he wasn't the body type that we needed. He was a fullback. Urban didn't use a fullback. We barely use a fullback now. There was no Mitch Rossi in the Urban Meyer offense. It came back a little bit with Ryan Day and with Kevin Wilson, but there was no Mitch Rossi in the Urban Meyer offense. There was no need for a guy like that. So Zach went from being a guy that played 60 plays a game as a blocking fullback in Jim Tressel's I formation to, 10 plays and 8 plays and 5 plays. And he was frustrated. And then one day Luke Fickell's like, hey, I'll take him because I don't have anybody, because guys were getting hurt. They were banged up. So I remember Indiana week in practice, Luke grabs Zach Bourne and literally takes him over to the defense. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Hopefully he'll get some playing time at some point. He started and played the entire Indiana game. Now, mind you, we gave up 49 points that game, and we won 52-49 out at Bloomington against Kevin Wilson and and a team that just was they schemed us up impeccably. But he makes that switch, and it was painful at first and hard because we just didn't have anybody else to play. Zach had to play a whole game, and he wasn't used to playing a whole game, so he got a little tired. But then he rounds the corner and has that great Michigan performance, and most notably, obviously, the sack that was a play where he basically freelanced and got a sack because he wasn't supposed to blitz, and he did anyways, and the rest is history. So I think that when you're one of these guys who's like the number 10 wide receiver, 15 wide receiver, 12, 13, 14. That is a heavy, heavy room in terms of number of guys in the building in that position room. If I'm Tim Moulton or Perry Eliano or one of these guys, and I can walk down the hallway and say, hey, you used to play DB when you were in 10th grade. Do you want to give us a shot for a year just so that you can actually get some burn and play, as opposed to, being the fifth string X, for Brian Hartline and getting 3 reps of practice? Like, I don't know who wouldn't do that, because these kids, they all want to play. They want to make the travel squad. They want to, add value to the team, potentially get a letter, play special teams. Again, if you're, looking at NFL guys like, Bam Childress, who was a spring game legend. Everyone always laughs at Bam. Bam won a Super Bowl ring. Like, nobody else in this podcast has won a Super Bowl ring. And it was because when he played for the New England Patriots, he played corner, he played receiver, he played returner. He did everything, and he was on practice squad for 3 years. And, the versatility, I'm telling you, it's never a bad thing to be more versatile as a football player. Nevada, the line it's funny. Of all the things people worry the most about, I think it's cornerback and offensive line. Between those two groups, I know we talked about this a couple days ago. give me your, on a 1 to 10, how worried are you about the offensive line? Then 1 to 10, how worried are you about the cornerback room?
A 1 on the offensive line and a 9.5 on the cornerback room. So it's like, I mean, I'm completely. I'm legitimately worried about the cornerback room, and I think that's so. For people like, oh, Nevada, you're just always positive, and you don't think there's any problems. No, I mean, when I see problems, I'll call them. I think we have a problem in the cornerback. I am raising my hand saying we have a problem in the cornerback room, and we need to find some answers. Do I think we can? Sure, but do we have those answers right now? No. Offensive line, on the other hand, not seeing the issues that the people are saying. Before we get too far down to, I don't normally watch TikTok or news, but I saw a great TikTok video by Zach Smith talking about the how Dwayne Haskins ended up at Ohio State. And when we started talking about the offensive line, I started thinking about Coach Stud, and I just thought that was if you haven't seen it, if you're a TikToker or whatever they call it, you call those people ticks or talks or TikToks or whatever they call them, go over there and watch the video, because it's a great story. As close as I am to Ohio State football, and I do this for a living, and I'd never heard the story. And it was a great story about how Haskin ultimately ended up at Ohio State. Maybe Burt Carton wants to share some of the details of that with you guys, but I thought it was really, really interesting and timely, considering the fact that we're talking about the O-line and the much maligned Stud.
Well, it's funny because I'd never heard that story. That one, for some reason, isn't one of the big hot urban legend, carried on by the beat writer and recruiting guy type stories that gets told about Stud. And again, I don't know Stud. I've talked to him one time in my life. Beat me in the 2007 national championship game when he was the O-line coach at LSU, so I'm still kind of salty about that. So, but other than that, I don't know Stud. I know that his lines have been good, and it was funny you say that because I actually talked to Zach today. I called him because he asked me what. I posted a video of we got 3 inches of snow in Ohio, so I had to use my snow. I got a snowblower, and he's like, "Dude, what brand is it? I need to get one." And I'm like, "Dude, it's the greatest thing I've ever bought in my life because like I hate shoveling snow and it just sucks." And so I was talking to him about that, and I was like, "Dude, that's Stud story is true." So the story is basically this. So Greg Stroud came aboard after the I believe it was the Clemson game, or it had to have been like 16. So 15 on to 16. I believe Stud's first year was 16. And it was before Ed got fired. It was the year that we lost 31-0 to Clemson. Stud was on staff with Ed. Ed coached the tight ends that year. Stud was on the O-line. So Stud came on right after the 15 season. And there was a quarterback that Tennessee had recruited named Jared Guantanamo. Let's call him Guantanamo Bay. But he ends up going to Tennessee. He was number 1 on their board. And, Stud had just been hired, and they're in a recruiting staff meeting, and they don't know what to do with quarterback because, the guy that they wanted to hit all the eggs in that basket decides to go to Tennessee. So they're kind of at square one, and it's right before, the second signing day, and what do we do and whatever. And Stud's like, how are you guys not recruiting Dwayne Haskins? And the coaches, like, they kind of a lukewarm, didn't really know interest in Haskins. And Stud's like, he's fantastic. And I believe that Mike Loxley was the offensive coordinator at Maryland, and that staff got fired by DJ Durkin. I believe Durkin's who came in and cleaned house. And and Haskins was kind of in limbo after Loxley got whacked. And now, obviously, Loxley's the head coach there, because Loxley went to Bama and came back and became the head coach at Maryland after they whacked Durkin. But it was just interesting because, Stud was the guy that was like, you guys got to recruit this guy. You're crazy for not recruiting him because his arm is fantastic. He's a nice kid. But, the thing about Urban is like Haskins couldn't run. So that was kind of like the giant, elephant in the room is that he wasn't a runner like every other Urban quarterback had been. He was slow, but his arm was obviously magnificent, first round talent. They watch his film, they get to know the kid, and they offer him, and they end up flipping him from Maryland because of Stud's recommendation. Like Stud's like, this is, Yeah, unbelievable. And then like they had like an official visit, I guess, where he came out, and Stud was like, it's hilarious because like people think we're the biggest like stud people in the world. But like he's like working the room, and Urban's like, man, this guy's so much better than Ed Warner. It's like unbelievable. And I was just laughing because I was like, I mean, they're O line coaches, so they're always kind of the dullards of the room, no matter who they are, just because that's the style. O line guys are always the fattest, dorkiest guys on the team, so you don't expect much of them in a recruiting sense. Like they're not going to be like Brian Hartline, who's going to roll up in a Ferrari and have like Louis Vuitton shoes on and walk into the high school. They're gonna O linemen are gonna be O linemen, big kind of trollish looking dudes walking around with the team polo on. But I just thought that was fascinating that Stud, who everybody hates and thinks is the worst recruiter of all time, was the guy that said, "Hey, you guys should recruit Dwayne Haskins." And then Dwayne Haskins basically changes the entire trajectory of the program in terms of moving from Urban's kind of rushing, half and half quarterback attack to a full-fledged air raid assault, like we were in 18 with Dwayne. And then, we were with Fields and now CJ Stroud. And now going forward, we're kind of this, more pro style, less running, downfield attack thing. But that was fascinating because Zach told that story and I was like, why have you never told that story? Why did it take you 3 years of your podcast or 4 years or whatever you've been doing this for to tell that story? Because I thought that was hilarious. And kudos to Chris Drew, because he's the guy that made that into a TikTok. And I was like, if I didn't watch that on TikTok, I would have never heard that. Because it was just like a little 2-minute clip. I mean, if you go on TikTok or Twitter or YouTube and just look at the Menace feed, it's on there, and it was completely fascinating. But what were your thoughts on that, Nevada? Because like I've never heard that Stud was the reason that we decided to go all in on Dwayne Haskins, but it was pretty interesting to hear that.
Well, I just thought it was interesting about talking about how Meyer had post-traumatic stress disorder from being in Florida and having John Brantley, who was another statue type of accomplished thrower but couldn't run. And as a result, his offense just went to heck, and they couldn't do anything offensively, and he just didn't want to have that happening. And so it's it was a great story. I was glad to see that, and I thought that for one was one positive utilization of TikTok by Nevadabuck, and so we may be poisoning the youth of America, but at least I got that little piece of information on TikTok, and I like to thank the Chinese national government for providing that for us.
And then now have all your pertinent info and data, so that's even better. So that was the price of us getting that, is that we gave China all of our information. So I'm gonna put on a little bit of Dorian Baru, who's a kid that was our most recent offer, young kid. It's funny because one of our best posters on the board, VB coach, actually teaches at Clayton Northmont, the home of Dorian Baru. Dorian likely to be a DB. Corner safety, and it's just funny because VB coach has been adamant, hey, we need to offer this guy, I'm just gonna let the tape roll. This is his sophomore film. He's a big joker, but he is a big athletic dude. And VB is like, you gotta offer this guy. There he's getting a pick. Obviously he's a sophomore, so this is varsity ball. But the kid is a freaky athlete. His mom was a really, really high-level sprinter at Ohio State for Ohio State's track team. He got the offer from Notre Dame, got an offer from Michigan, and then Ohio State came in. But this is a kid that I think we need to get. He's a top 50 player in the class of 2025. And he's right here in Ohio, so I think you got to put the press on. You got to tug at mom's heartstrings as much as you can. They like Notre Dame, they like Michigan, they visited both. But it was just interesting because, like, VB coach's point was, Ohio State has been really big on slow playing a lot of these kids that are Ohio kids because, I think that they kind of play on the fact that they grew up as Ohio State fans. Their dream is to go to Ohio State. So Ohio State's, coaching staff and personnel people, their recruiting people can say, well, we can wait a little longer to offer this kid and, but just because whatever. And again, I was I didn't get offered until December of my senior year. So I was like about the slowest play that you could possibly get. But, they know that if you offer some of these kids late, they'll flip and they'll go to Ohio State because Ohio State really is that special. And that's where most of these kids want to go. Nevada, your thoughts on kind of the strategy? I think that obviously it's hard to compare Ryan Day's strategy to Urban Meyer to Tressel because I think it, when Tress took over the job in 2002, you literally could take a class that's 85% Ohio kids and still have a dominant class, a top 2 class like that 2002 class was. And the overall talent, I believe, is eroded in Ohio. There's still, 8 to 10 good players that are Ohio State quality a year in the state of Ohio, but I mean, it's just dwindled. And again, I believe it's because of the population shifting to the south. I know that the northeastern section of Ohio is way down compared to where it was even when I was in high school. But your thoughts on Ohio State waiting until some of the other powers come in to offer? Because I always thought it was kind of like one of those things where they just don't have the balls to make the call on a kid. So they have to wait for Michigan to call and Notre Dame to call and offer and then to jump in. But what are your thoughts on that? And what is the kind of the correct way to play that? Because it's tough, man. Because, if you pull a scholarship on a kid from out of state, it's one thing. But, if a kid doesn't develop a la Danny Clark and you yank his scholarship offer, it really sends ripple effects in the state of Ohio through the Coaches Association. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just think they have to be extra careful. And, I think you laid out the issues. The bottom line is Ohio State, I should say the state of Ohio, has been down from a talent perspective. And when the talent's down, there's going to be less kids to offer. You have to be more prudent with the offers because, as you said, you can't make them, you can't extend them early and then yank them back. Like you could, we do that in Florida all the time, and we think it's kind of a running joke that, it's just an opening bid to get those kids there in Florida. But you got to be careful in Ohio. But with a kid like this, I mean, this is a big timer. This is one of those kids that doesn't come along very often, and when they do, you've got to jump on it. I mean, he's a big time. I mean, he reminds me of a Malcolm Jenkins, and a big guy that can run, that can play either side of the ball, and really likes to get after it. Really likes to deliver the blow when he's on the defensive side. Can play the ball really well, and loves to get the ball on the offensive side. So he's a special athlete. A guy that you just have to have in your class because kids like this just do not come along that often in the state of Ohio. When they do, you got to grab them.
Yeah, I think this is a kid that's going to be really exciting to see how much he's grown, this summer, going into his junior campaign, because, these kids can develop significantly in terms of explosion, muscular definition. These kids really hit the gym, and you'll see sophomores show up. It's like with offensive linemen. Like, for instance, I was 210 as a sophomore and I was 250 as a junior, and it was, good weight. I mean, it was like muscle and strength and speed. So I was bigger, faster, stronger because, these kids are just developing as they, grow and ascend. And this is a kid, he'll get offered by Bama and Georgia and Clemson. Like, he's that kind of guy. He's a national top 50 recruit. So he'll have all the big dogs chasing after him. But really excited to see his film. Like again, VB coach, it's just funny because he's probably our most knowledgeable poster on the board just because he's been a high school football coach for 25 years. He knows the game. He's seen good players. Coach Taylor Decker, and was on Taylor Decker, and still gives me crap that we didn't offer Taylor Decker earlier, which we didn't until Urban came in and Ed Warner came over with Tim Hinton from Notre Dame, and we flipped Taylor from Notre Dame. But that was one that was a tragedy that we didn't offer that kid earlier. But we were just behind in the times in recruiting in 2011 under Truss and then Luke Fickell, because we didn't understand that, okay, well, kids don't have to go to camp anymore. You got to offer them early. It's not a respect thing. Because like Taylor, the thing about Taylor is he wasn't going to come to camp. Like, he already had a Notre Dame offer. He wasn't going to come camp for us and show out. It was like, do you want to offer him or not? And I was like, well, he's 6'8", and our tackles are, not 6'8". We got a bunch of guys walking out the door, and this recruiting class that we took in 2011 was probably the worst offensive line class in the history of Ohio State, and not even close, because we literally took, I think, 5 guys, and there was one career start out of 5 guys, and it was just kind of a BS start where Tony Underwood started a game as a freshman, and he got pulled after 2 drives. So it was a bad class. Take some questions because we got some good ones. I knew that this one was going to come up. Kudos to Jackson Carman, man. That guy got thrown into a really, really tight spot, playing Buffalo on the road, loud environment, really good pass rushers, really played a great game at left tackle. So Hummus Hero, great name, by the way. You said he actually played pretty well, Kirk. Did that surprise you? I know you hadn't been high on him. I totally, I'll eat crow on that. I didn't see that coming. I thought that Cincinnati with 3 new starters on the O line, again, they lost Jonah Williams, who's their first round left tackle, Lyle Collins, who they paid $48 million or whatever to play right tackle. They lost Karras, or excuse me, not Karras. They lost their is it Ali Mark? It was whatever the right guard was from Tampa that they signed. So they lost a combined probably $35 million in annual salary between 3 guys, and they started Jackson Carman, who again, as good as he played on Sunday. And I know I haven't been very high on him, but obviously the Bengals staff hasn't been very high on him because he hasn't played all year. I mean, he's literally been like the 6th or 7th man for the Bengals. Put him out at left tackle. He played great. The 2 young guys on the right side played great. And, they squashed a really good Bills defense, on the road in a game that they were underdogs in. So kudos to him. I mean, obviously, I think that he's a guy that's got a lot of upside. He was a really young guy when he went pro as a 3rd-year junior. Obviously, we're all bitter that he wasn't a Buckeye. Decided to go to Clemson. And even when we missed on him, it's not like we really missed him because the last game of his college career was us waxing Clemson in the 2020 Sugar Bowl. So it's not, did we miss him? Yeah, but did we really miss him? No. But kudos. I always root for, just full disclaimer, I always root for every Ohio team. I played for the Bengals in 08, so they've literally paid my bills before. So good for them. And I love Sam Hubbard is probably one of my top 5 favorite Buckeyes of all time. One of the nicest kids. Great. I literally texted him after the game. One of the greatest kids you ever meet. Von Bell, one of the greatest kids you ever meet. I saw Eli after the Notre Dame game this year. Like we hung out. Went out. Some of my favorite Buckeyes of all time are on that team. So it's really easy for me to root for them. And like I said, kudos for Jackson Carman. Nevada, were you surprised by how well Jackson Carman played at left tackle on his first career start?
Yeah, I was surprised by just how well the entire Bengals team played, and I give them all the credit. I'm a Browns fan, so don't particularly care for the Bengals, but have mad respect for the fact that they went into Buffalo. I mean, Buffalo's got all the emotion of Hamlin and coming back, and the Buffalo, the Mafia, and then they go in there and they just whack them. And the game really wasn't all that close. So no, I give the Bengals all the credit in the world for that. Last year, everybody was like, "Oh, it's kind of a fluky run to the Super Bowl." Now it's like, nah, it really wasn't fluky. It probably sounds like the start of something big in Cincinnati. And look, Cincinnati got the memo earlier than the Browns did about drafting Ohio State players, and somehow the Browns just refused to draft Ohio State players. I think they went from Craig Powell to Denzel Ward was the first one in 25 years or whatever it was. So I've always said if I was if you go through the draft, you say if the Browns had just drafted the best available Ohio State player in every draft, what would their team look like? And they'd have 9 All Pros and be a lot better. But they just refused to draft them. So the Bengals did. The Bengals are winning. So who day? I give them all the credit in the world for that great victory.
Yeah, it's funny. The Browns get the #1 overall pick, and they get their Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, and it's Baker Mayfield. The Bengals get Joe Burrow. So quite a dichotomy between the 2 franchises. And then we had to pay through the nose to get Deshaun Watson, who I think potentially could be better next year. I mean, he wasn't great this year, paying an absolute fortune for him. But if you don't have a quarterback, you have no chance in the league. So I mean, I at least give the Browns credit for doing what they did. So at least they took a shot at it. But it's just going to be interesting to see what they can get out of him going forward. Henry. I was going to say Henry. All eyes on JT and Jack Story. It's funny because the JTT thing was something that I used to say all the time until somebody inside the Woody Hayes corrected me and said, "Hey, it's just JT," as in Jalen Tuimoloau. And I was like, "What do you mean?" Everyone calls him JTT. It's like, no, he doesn't like to go by JT. He goes by JT as a nickname or Jalen Tuimoloau. They explained it to me and I was like, okay, so it's just JT. I got it. So Nevada, we hear all this talk from Jim Knowles about safety-driven defense. Do we have to morph this thing into a defensive end-driven defense going forward?
Well, I think every defense is a defensive end driven defense. You know, like the great defenses always have guys that can get after the quarterback. The mediocre defenses don't have guys that can get after the quarterback. It's really that simple. And in the modern game, which is dominated by passing, it's all about, can you bring pressure with 4, or do you have to blitz to really, you know, move the guy off the spot? And, you know, for Ohio State this year, we were not as good at rushing the passers as we needed to be. Not nearly as good as I thought we would be. But, you know, we've got 2 5-star guys there that I am willing to push all the rest of my chips into the table and say they're going to have a big year next year. I'm predicting double-digit sacks for both of them. We've talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to go a little bit more detail on this. I think yoga is going to play a role in this. Or for anybody who's offended by the term yoga, I should call it dynamic stretching, flexibility, body contortion, whatever you want to call it. I think they're going for that in a way to develop more bend. You know, obviously this is the gold standard of all gold standards. But go watch Nick Bosa play and watch how low he gets to the ground and how he bends the corner. And that's the model. That's what those guys need to get at. That's what they're working towards. I think they've realized they were a little stiff. They're dripping in athletic ability. They've got the moves. They've got the thing. They just don't have the bend and they don't have the flexibility. And they're going to dedicate themselves hard this offseason to developing it. And I think they will. And I think as a result, I think they're going to be big. But are we a defensive end driven defense? Every single year we are. And those 2 guys are going to lead the charge for us next year and be part of the reason why I'm so confident we're going to be dominant is JT and Jack.
This is interesting. So Michael Campbell's obviously a big Notre Dame fan. He sends us a note about Notre Dame's going to whoop us and all this. And then it's funny, the very last name he mentions is Lorenzo Styles. So, I don't know. Nevada, I think that there's smoke and whispers about Lorenzo Styles Jr. becoming a Buckeye, especially if he wants to play DB, especially if he wants to play corner. That's going to be really interesting because the thing is that, after spring, there's that second transfer window, but with Lorenzo Jr., he's going to graduate from Notre Dame. So he doesn't have to have a window. I mean, when you're a grad transfer, you can take off whatever you want. And, it's like I always would tell kids in recruiting, don't go somewhere because of a coach, because coaches leave, and they leave frequently. And don't go there because of some scheme, because, a head coach can take off tomorrow. Go where you want, where you feel like home, where you're comfortable. And, your brother Sonny's at Ohio State, and you're from Picktown. And, when kids would be between like Ohio State and Michigan, and I remember vividly having this talk with Kyle Kalis, and, Kyle didn't heed my advice, and he's actually told me that he wishes he would have. I'm like, look, if you're between Ohio State and Michigan, that's fine. Michigan is a great school. Obviously, it's a renowned, school. Everyone's a hater on Michigan. I hate Michigan too, but it's a very good school. That being said, where do you want to live when you're done playing football? Do you want to live in the state of Michigan? Oh, you do? Okay, we'll go to Michigan. Do you want to live in the state of Ohio? If you're from Cleveland or Columbus or Cincinnati or whatever, it's very beneficial to be an Ohio State Buckeye. I'm just telling you. And again, I don't milk it the way a lot of guys do. I mean, obviously I run a site that we talk about Ohio State football every day. It's just my passion. I love talking football. I love interacting with you guys. But, if you live in the state of Ohio and you're a Buckeye, it's a lot easier to get doors open than it is if you're a Michigan Wolverine. That might not make sense to some of these kids that are Ohio kids that are picking Michigan over Ohio State, but I've seen it in action. I've seen kids that are my age that went to Michigan and all of a sudden they come back here and the doors don't just magically swing open for Michigan guys the same way they do. And there's a lot of, old timers that own companies and big, and they remember that you picked Michigan over Ohio State. And when you come knocking on the door trying to get some help, they remember that, hey, I wanted you to come play for my school and I wanted to root you on, and you basically give me the big F you and went to, our arch nemesis. And, I don't know. I think that's it's always a powerful thing. Nevada, my little pitch I just give, do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Would you edit any of it? Because again, that's just what I was, again, like I hear kids that they love Brian Hartline, they love Justin Fry, they love Ryan Day. And again, I just try to be real with these kids, man. 'Cause like I saw Jim Tressel get thrown out like yesterday's garbage. I saw Luke Fickell get fired. I see coaches that go on to the NFL. I see coaches that take head coaching jobs elsewhere, coordinator jobs elsewhere. What are your thoughts on what I said about picking a school based on the school that you like the most more than a coach or a scheme or whatever?
Well, I took it that you were talking about pick a school that in a place that you're likely or want have an interest in living in afterwards. And I think that's sage advice for any person that's going to college. I tell my kids that, whether it be that aren't playing football, that are just going to go on to life because, your compatriots, your future customers, your all thing are going to be alumni or supporters of the school that you went to. And, that just gives you a leg up in business and life. And I think that's always, for anybody who wants to live in the state of Ohio, going to Ohio State just makes it's a great business decision. And like you said, if it's close from a football standpoint, choose the long-term business decision because that'll pay you 10 times what the football side would. But no, I think that's really good. And as for Styles, I heard he was coming. I don't know if anything's changed, and things could have, with the fact that his brother didn't see the field much here at Ohio State. I don't know how much that played in favor, but I heard he was going to transfer or grad transfer or whatever we want to call it and be a Buckeye. So we'll see if that comes through. We certainly need cornerback, so he would certainly be a welcome body in that room.
Yeah, and I think that it's obviously one of those things where he's very interested. Now, Ohio State, it takes two to tango. It's not just one, you don't just get to pick somewhere and show up and they hand you a jersey. Like Ohio State has to want him. I don't think that there's interest in him playing receiver, which is what he's played at Notre Dame. I think that obviously you take anybody that could walk and chew gum and play cornerback and cover because we're really thin there. We've had transfers. I don't think there will be more after spring, but again, after spring, there's always going to be a handful of guys, 5 to 10 guys that just don't like where they're at on the depth chart. They don't like their projected role. They've got people that are doing the back room communicating, the tampering, whispering sweet nothings into their ears, saying, "Oh, if you come here, then you'll have this role and you'll be our starter or you'll be whatever." And I think that's the problem with kids is I think kids are gullible. And I think that they get lied to a lot in this, and they jump out of a situation at Ohio State and they go somewhere elsewhere, and maybe those things do come true. Maybe they do go elsewhere, and what's promised is what's delivered. But I'd always be very wary of these things because a lot of guys that are making those promises, they're guys that are probably in trouble in terms of their job. And they could get whacked, in November. And then all of a sudden you're stuck somewhere and you're like, oh my God, I came down here and now there's going to be a new staff and whatever. But it's interesting. God, you guys, I'm telling you guys give us some of the greatest questions and I appreciate this so much. Mitchell Swanson, I love this one. So Jack Spot. The Jack Spot I thought was a bit of a dud this year. There can't be a person on this earth that was more excited about the Jack Spot. I studied it. I watched Jim Knowles' clinic tapes. I saw, kind of the benefits to it, kind of how it messes with the offensive line blocking schemes. That being said, against Michigan and Georgia, when we deployed it, we gave up massive amounts of yardage. We didn't use it as a pass rush scheme, a scheme to get after the quarterback. It was more of a early rundown thing where you kind of have like Jack Sawyer kind of moving around, kind of like a UFO amoeba type defense where he gets to pick where he goes and he reads the pulling guard and he can insert either in the opposite A gap or meet the guy in the hole and cut the guard. And like I literally could play the position because I studied it so much. And when we actually got to using it in a game, it really was ineffective. And I think that it was a lost year for Jack Sawyer, who's a kid that we all have high hopes for. We think that we could turn it around, but in that position, he just wasn't as effective. And this is a kid that had 4.5 sacks, but he's a 5-star guy. I think he's got to put his hand on the ground. I think he needs to have Zach Harrison's spot be a starting defensive end instead of a starting Jack. And I think that, when they weren't deploying it, he was playing like 15 snaps a game. So it was really interesting how they did that. But Nevada, Mitchell asked CJ Hicks in next year's Jack spot. What are your thoughts on, he writes Kyle, but I'm sure you mean Kai Stokes next year. The next to Malik Hooker, possibly. That would be fantastic. But what are your thoughts on that? Great question. Appreciate you, Mitchell.
No, I think you went right to the heart of the matter. I mean, to me, the jack look is an effective pass rushing tool and is a really ineffective to my untrained eye against the rush. And I think, what it causes us to do against the rush is, get out of our gaps, lose our soundness. And as a result, we gave up so many big plays when we were doing that. And again, like you, I was really excited about the possibilities. But when you see it on the field, I think it was very effective at Oklahoma State against those Big 12 offenses when they went. But again, it was primarily used as a fifth pass rusher. Here when you're going up against the run, man, it's kind of hit or miss. It was certainly a gamble, and it certainly resulted in some big plays. We talked about those 7, 8, 9 big plays that we gave up out of our 1,000 snaps, but I'll bet you 80% of them were in the jack look, and so I think it's something that Knowles is going to have to take a hard look at because for me, I don't see the benefit relative to it might have been execution, it might have been on the players, but for me, I would kind of scrap that. I thought a lot of the other things he did were very effective, but the jack I would file that under the thing of failed experiments at least this far in his tenure at Ohio State.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it was something that people were excited about because you think about the walk around defensive end and how he gets to pick his gap, and it sounded like it was really fun to play because pass rushers always want to be able to be unpredictable and kind of you're turned loose. You don't have responsibility other than get to the quarterback, and it never developed into that. It was mostly a rundown tool, and again, it just wasn't very effective. And I think that it's predominantly for when you're at like a Big 12 school or a Duke level program, and you get some guys that are maybe smaller defensive ends. They're kind of between being like a big linebacker, small D end, and how can you deploy a guy like that who's a tough guy and whatever. And I frankly thought Jack was too physically big for the role. I think that generally you want a guys like 230. Jack's 260. He couldn't get there in certain spots at times, and I just think that he just needs to be a hand on the ground defensive end because that's what his bread and butter is, and that's what made him great when he was at Pickerington, and he was one of the top 5 players in the country. So I think he's got to get back to that in a hurry. Paul Buckeye, what's up, brother? Appreciate you as always. One of our regulars, one of the best. New Albany, Ohio. We got to grab lunch one of these days. Barring injuries, who will lead in total yardage for running backs? Do you believe Xavier Johnson will be our best punt kick returner instead of Emeka Egbuka? And thank you as always. Appreciate you, brother. Total yards for running backs, obviously, I think Nevada and I are going to go chalk Trey Henderson. He's got a big year, contract year. He's got to carry the mail. Got to get that foot right. Got to, just grind and go back to that Saquon Barkley trajectory. Saquon obviously was a, top 5 pick, freak of nature, superstar. And that's what Trey, when he was coming out of high school in his first year, looked just like that. Last year, obviously, was a lost year, injuries. I think that the timeshare will do him well just because you've got Mayan, you got a lot of mouths to feed. Dallin Hayden's going to need some touches. So it keeps a lot of tread on the tires when it comes draft time, which I think is great for him. And in terms of the Xavier Johnson, I think you got to find a role for X. The thing that's going to be interesting this spring, in my opinion, is how much do we see X at running back? Because, Ryan Day ran some really fantastic concepts versus Georgia. He ran like a little 4 wide receiver set, that ate up the 2 deep safeties, and he got the matchup he wanted where he put X on a middle linebacker from Georgia. And even Georgia's middle linebacker is probably the fastest linebacker in the country, or one of the fastest in the country, couldn't keep up with X when X ran basically a go route. He came out of the backfield, released, the protection was clean, he checked, and then he just went deep and he scorched the guy and scored a huge touchdown. I think that, with Trey coming off injury, with Evan Pryor coming off injury, I don't know if Mayan was really banged up at the end of the year, so I don't know if he's had any more cleanup surgeries. And I'm sure he'll probably be monitored in the spring and not be full go. Be interesting to see how much X gets as a running back, because again, he was fantastic. He was a lot like an Alvin Kamara type for our offense, which I know that sounds gaudy and crazy because Alvin Kamara is an all-pro running back for the Saints, but that was kind of the element he brought. He was a guy that could catch the ball, a matchup nightmare, and when you wear number 10 and your roster lists you as a receiver, and the defensive coaches are upstairs checking personnel and realizing, hey, they're in 5 wide receivers, or they're in four wide receivers and a tight end. 14 personnel. Whatever personnel, 21, 12 personnel, like which denotes the number of tight ends and the number of receivers, running backs. He's a guy that people, they identify him as a receiver, and then all of a sudden he's lined up next to the running back, or next to the quarterback, and you're like, oh crap, this guy can play running back too. So I thought that was a fantastic move by Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson. A lot of utility with this kid. I would love for him to find a role as a return specialist, get Emeka Ibuka off the field for punts, even though Emeka, you can see why Brian Hartline keeps him back deep on punts. It's because he is the smoothest fair catcher I've ever seen. I think that the way that the game has devolved into basically being a punt and fair catch the ball, Emeka's not going to take any kill shots back there. So, but it'd be great to see X take that over. But Nevada, what are your thoughts? Who's going to lead in total yardage this year? And what are your thoughts on Xavier Johnson, another one of the Josh Proctor-ish 6-year returners that was a really pleasant surprise for us?
Yeah, no, I'll go with Trey from the rushing thing, just because, Trey is Saquon Barkley, and he's going to show it next year just how good he is, and people are going to be on the Trey, back on the Trey train. There's plenty of room. I'll save you a spot. As for Xavier, we talked about just earlier in the broadcast, I talked about, Marvin and Emeka and Julian and Brandon Ennis and Cardinal Tate and the Rodgers, but I didn't even mention Xavier. And then we talked about the running backs, and I do the same thing, Trey and Mayan and Dallin and Chip. You don't even mention Xavier. But, I mean, I think, dare I say it, but Xavier really is kind of that Percy Harvin role. We've always talked about that H-back and, where's that guy that's kind of that hybrid that can kind of create those mismatches and kind of do it. But that's really what Xavier does. And he's really kind of a position unto itself. I loved what he did. He made so many big plays for Ohio State that I think, again, getting guys like that back are one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this 2023 team. Underrated walk-on player Xavier Johnson. Nobody even heard of him before this year, and this year he's for me it's a key acquisition, a huge acquisition, the equivalent of getting any 4 or 5-star recruit in the country, because he's a guy who can immediately help us, immediately make plays for us. We know, and I think he's going to have a huge year next year, and couldn't be more excited about seeing him. And like I said, I really think he is the kind of that H back. That Percy Harvin spot, and I think it fits him perfectly.
This is a very funny comment. Michael Campbell, obviously huge Notre Dame fan, has been big in the chat, has been writing a lot of comments, but this is one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life. Notre Dame's running back room over Ohio State, check. Now, Nevada and I have said, and I totally agree, this is the deepest Ohio State running back room in history. I've never seen anything like it in terms of the overall star power with Trey at the top, and the depth. And again, I don't want to get too big into it, because we could have 3 of these guys leave and transfer out, and then all of a sudden I'm just eating crow. But you look at the top with Trey, potential first round pick. You get Evan Pryor back, who was a guy that looked really dynamic in the spring last year. You get Chop Williams. I mean, you got Dallin Hayden, then you got Chip. I mean, you got Chip Trainum. You got potentially Xavier. I mean, that is a insanely deep running back room. Those guys have all started, played, and not just played against Akron. Like, they've played against Michigan, Georgia, big time minutes, big time starts. But yeah, I know where you're going to go with this, Nevada. But do you think Notre Dame is better running backs than Ohio State this year?
Well, I mean, unless Jerome Bettis is coming back or something like that, no. I think Ohio State gets the edge. No, the Ohio State running back room is just, it's silly. And like I said, I never expected to get Mayan Williams back this year. I mean, like you talk about guys like Dallin Hayden and Mayan, and you're talking about all 3 guys that have gone for over 100 yards and multiple touchdowns as starters in the games. To have 3 of those guys in the same running room. And then I know Chip's gone for over 100 yards at Arizona State and multiple touchdowns. So you've got 4 guys that have done it in college, and then Xavier Johnson, probably the most versatile running back / wide receiver in the country. So no, it's a deep running back room. It's an experienced one. And would I take it over Notre Dame's? Yeah, I would take it over. Notre Dame could take the last 10 years of running backs and take an all-star team, and they could throw Rudiger in there as well. And I'd still take Ohio State's running back room over theirs.
Yeah, unless they bring back Bettis and Ricky Waters, then Theo Reddick, I don't see it. I think that this is an incredibly deep. Again, if you look at our skill as a total, it's the best in Ohio State history. I've never seen a deeper receiver room, running back room, tight end room. I think it's truly going to be a problem for the coaching staff to distribute reps to the guys that aren't the top guys. The top guys, Marvin, just put him in bubble wrap. See you in August. Emeka, same way. I don't care if they even practice at all in spring. I just put him on the jugs machine and tell him to go, drink a Capri Sun over, in the lawn chair, because I don't want anything to happen to those two. Cade Stover, same way. Go drink a Kool-Aid and hit the jugs machine and whatever. I just think that it's some of these guys, they've been proven, they're tested. You want to keep them healthy, light wear and tear. And then there's some young guys the Jaden Ballards and the Joe Royers. They need 1 million reps because they got to be ready to go, step up, and find their way, into a significant role on the 2023 Ohio State Buckeyes. But I'm really excited about it. I love spring ball. I love winter conditioning because for me, as we get inside information from the Woody Hayes on how guys are looking at workouts, that kind of sets the table for what to look for in spring ball. I've seen a lot of guys that make big jumps in winter workouts. They kind of take the limiter off because all of a sudden there's an open spot where they can compete and potentially win a job and be a big time part of the football program after a year of redshirting or a year of being a backup or being a third string guy. All of a sudden there's this ferocious competition that's spring inside the Woody Hayes. And again, the thing I love about Urban Meyer and Mickey Marotti's carried it over with Ryan Day is that they track and keep score and grade everything these guys do every day. So when those guys walk into the building, they're not just walking in to get a gentleman lift in and chill. And no, they're counting everything, they're grading everything. And when you keep score, guys that are hyper competitive really get competitive. So I remember they did that for us when we played, and they would grade between Big Ten champion, national champion was the highest one. And on days when I didn't grade as a national champion, I would just go ballistic. I'd be so angry, and I'd recount, this is how much I lifted. I won every sprint. Because guys, they want to be at the top of the board when they're in a situation like this. So super excited about that. God, I'm telling you, with you guys, these hours go by fast. We're literally right over an hour. So we're going to wrap this thing. We will be back tomorrow. Again, we are just creating content every night for you guys. We love interacting with you guys. We will be on BuckeyeScoop.com all night. But any final thoughts, Nevada? Again, great questions. I appreciate you guys as always. But any final thoughts, Nevada?
Nah, just super excited about 2023. And like I said, winter workouts are in full swing, and we're going to start to see who's starting to separate themselves and who the young guys are starting to step up. So we'll see everybody on BuckeyeScoop.com, and appreciate the absolute tremendous support both online and on the message board, because it's we couldn't do it without you guys. So appreciate it.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to wrap this thing. As always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We appreciate you guys so much. We have so much fun with you guys interacting. Again, if you guys are the cream of the crop, if you are the 5-star Ohio State fan, you got to get on BuckeyeScoop.com. You got to join it, become part of our community, because that's what we recruit. We recruit only 5-star fans to our site. It's not for everybody. It's only for the top tier. And I think you guys that are tuning in really want to know what's going on. You want to be knowledgeable. You want to be the people that say, hey, I know what's going on inside the Woody Hayes. And that's what we do. I'm telling you, we've got fantastic information flowing. Bill the Bank Greene will be joining us either tomorrow or the next day. He's driving back from Florida starting tomorrow morning. But he's got a ton of great information from Miami. He's at a huge 7-on-7 tournament down there. Huge stuff. So we really appreciate you guys. Again, you guys get to drive the show, which makes it fun for Nevada and I, because you guys have fantastic questions. And again, if you enjoy these little 1-hour snippets, join BuckeyeScoop.com, because we do this 24 hours a day. We talk about everything. Fantastic business people. We talk about great football, NFL, basically anything you could imagine. it's always a blast, and it's always popping on there. And that's the thing that makes me proud, is that we have the most active board in the Ohio State space, and it really is a good time. Really knowledgeable people, really fun place to be. Very, very high end, and we would love for you guys to join our crew. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate you guys as always. We're going to go again tomorrow, roughly around 7 o'clock. Don't hold me to it. We always kind of go a little earlier or later based upon if there's basketball or anything to go again. So, but we love doing this with you guys. We appreciate you guys. We're going to break down a ton of film. Got about 50 new videos uploaded of kids that are going to be in the class of 24 and 25 that our guys are going out and seeing. So we're going to be breaking that stuff down. But we appreciate you as always. In the comments, let me know who needs to step up during winter workouts leading into spring ball. I need names. I need Joe Royer. I need Tyleek Williams, big nose guard. We need some guys to get cranked up. Some of these offensive linemen, Zed Mikulski, step up. It's time. It's go time now, man. There's no Paris in front of you. You got to go be our left tackle. So give me some names. And also, as always, shout out where you're from. Again, I always say it, but I love when you guys do that, because I can't believe some of the parts of the world that listen to this, and I appreciate you guys as always. So I'm about to log on to BuckeyeScoop.com. I'm going to be there until I close my eyes and go to bed, probably for the next 3 hours. So if you guys enjoy this, got more questions, head on over to BuckeyeScoop.com. Make yourself a membership. It's also a fantastic gift. So thank you guys so much. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. Spotify as well. All the major podcast formats. In the YouTube comments, if there's a format that you listen on and we are not on, please let me know. But I appreciate you guys. If you enjoy this content, please leave us a like, click subscribe, and also click on the little alert bell, and you will get a little notification every single time we go live, so you'll never miss us, and you get to interact with us basically every night. So I appreciate you guys. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, night, and I will talk to you tomorrow. So thank you, Buckeye Nation, and thank you, Scoop family. See you guys tomorrow. Go Bucks.